It was never meant to reach her hands, a plain, unmarked envelope that somehow slipped past royal safeguards and appeared silently in Kate's study like a whisper from the past. The moment she opened it, the atmosphere shifted, because what lay inside was not merely a forgotten relic, but a revelation decades in the making, its consequences finally unavoidable. At first glance, the envelope itself offered no clues. No crest, no signature, only a single stark word stamped across the front, confidential enough to unsettle her, as the palace did not make mistakes without reason. As she slid her finger beneath the flap, a chill spread through her. Not fear but recognition, the sense that something irreversible had been set in motion. Inside was a thin stack of papers, stripped of ceremony and explanation, precise and unforgiving. Expecting routine bureaucracy, her eyes instead landed on names, familiar ones, and then one that stopped her breath entirely. Diana Spencer, followed by another name she did not recognize, one that had never existed in the carefully protected history she had been taught to defend. The words did not change, and the conclusion did not soften. The report confirmed a biological connection, not speculation or rumor, but blood measured, analyzed, and verified beyond dispute. As the meaning settled into her bones, the room seemed to tilt, because this was not gossip resurrected from dismissed tabloids, but science cold, sterile, and absolute. Her hands began to shake, the paper trembling as if it carried its own pulse, and the world she thought she understood, the family she had sworn to uphold, suddenly felt fragile, built not on truth but on omission. Memories surged without warning. Diana's interviews, once dismissed as emotional turbulence, diary entries Kate had seen preserved behind glass at Althorp, words that hinted at fear, betrayal, and unfinished truths. What once seemed poetic now screamed with clarity, warnings, not confessions, breadcrumbs, not breakdowns. Everything inexplicable snapped into place with terrifying precision. Diana had been trying to say something, not loudly or safely, but persistently, and decades later that message had landed in Kate's hands with consequences too vast to ignore. Her heart pounded as she grasped the weight of what she held, realizing this was not just about the past, nor only about Diana, but a truth threatening the foundation beneath the crown itself, so dangerous it had been buried, erased, and guarded by silence. Yet the sterile laboratory results were only the beginning, because the real firestorm had yet to ignite. Kate knew she was not the only one who needed to know, and as questions mounted whether the greatest royal scandal had been manipulation rather than mistake, whether the palace had known and acted to erase every trace, the pattern became impossible to deny. This was not negligence, it was strategy. Determined to uncover more, Kate sought history buried beneath velvet and protocol, making a formal request to the royal archives, only to receive silence in paper form. Files mutilated, names blacked out, paragraphs missing, entire sections sealed under vague claims of national interest. No document carried a complete timeline. The message, deliberate and unmistakable, do not look further, but Kate had already seen too much to stop, and she turned instead to what the monarchy never anticipated. People, the quiet ones, staff who had served for decades. They moved through halls others never saw, cleaned rooms that echoed with whispers, and these were not just employees, but witnesses, many now retired, living quietly with memories that refused to fade. What Kate saw in their faces was not ignorance but fear. None denied Diana's intensity in her final months, yet none called her unstable. Instead, they spoke of her being watched and tracked. One butler recalled a night when Diana tearfully confided that her calls were no longer private, that every letter she sent was read before reaching its destination. Friends she once trusted had grown distant, some removed from service entirely, and she feared her world was tightening until escape became impossible. A former lady-in-waiting spoke with a trembling voice, saying they would never let Diana leave with the truth, that if she ever tried, they would ensure no one believed her. These were not stories of a woman unraveling, but testimonies of a mother resisting forces far greater than herself, and as Kate listened, her dread hardened into fury. Then came whispers of a pact, a quiet agreement allegedly formed after Diana's death by senior royals and palace aides, meant to protect the crown at all costs by denying rumors, erasing traces, and silencing anyone who might speak. Kate encountered it in an offhand remark from a former private secretary. It was settled. The line must not be contaminated. When she asked what he meant, he paled and warned her she didn't want to know. But Kate did want to know, and that need led her to a place even the royal family seemed to have forgotten. Althorp, Diana's childhood home. There, a longtime housekeeper recalled a conversation before Diana's final trip to Paris, when she made one request: if anything happens to me, never let them touch that room, pointing down a hallway no guest had ever entered. That room held more than memories. It contained letters, photographs, and confirmations more devastating than Kate could have imagined. Behind a door no one dared open, Diana's voice waited in ink, preserved in urgency. A roadmap not only of pain but of prophecy, and decades later, Catherine followed it straight into the heart of the monarchy's deepest fear, as the silent hallway hummed with unfinished stories, and she stepped closer to the truth. The housekeeper's words echoed in Kate's mind as she approached the room Diana had once claimed as her sanctuary. Never let them touch it. The door opened with a reluctant groan, revealing dust-covered boxes stacked with deliberate care. But it wasn't the dust that stole her breath, it was the handwriting. Diana's unmistakable slant, elegant yet urgent. Among the boxes, one stood apart, labeled for Catherine, when the time is right. Without hesitation, Kate untied the ribbon and lifted the lid to find what felt less like belongings and more like confessions. Dozens of letters worn at the edges, diaries with pages trembling with vulnerability. As she read, the weight crashed down. These were not the ramblings of a paranoid woman, but the desperate words of someone who had sensed the coming storm, who had been preparing. One name surfaced repeatedly, a man referenced in the DNA report, not a stranger or a footnote, but someone Diana had trusted deeply. The letters described secret meetings, conversations away from palace ears, and an affection that leapt from the pages, though curiously, his name was always shortened to initials, as if Diana feared writing it fully. Kate's pulse quickened with each line as Diana grew more candid and frantic, speaking of betrayal, manipulation, and surveillance, yet softening whenever she mentioned him, revealing a tenderness missing from every palace photograph, a connection heartbreakingly human rather than political. Then came the photographs, faded, fragile, yet damning. Diana and the man, laughing, holding hands, once embracing, his face fully visible, unmistakable. In one image, the resemblance hit Kate like a thunderclap. The eyes, the jawline, the quiet defiance. He looked like Harry. Her hands trembled as she opened the final envelope at the bottom of the box, revealing another DNA report. This time, from a different lab, dated just months before Diana's death. The result identical to the one Kate had already seen. The same man, the same truth, undeniable and twice confirmed. Diana hadn't imagined any of it. She had documented it, preserved it, and left it waiting for someone strong enough to face it. Kate's breath came in shallow bursts as she realized this man wasn't merely someone Diana had loved, he was family. A missing piece of the royal puzzle that had been torn out, hidden, and denied, now resurfacing after decades in the shadows. Yet before she could fully process the magnitude of the discovery, she knew there was one more person who had to know, even though the truth would shatter him. William had always tried to protect his mother's memory, but nothing could prepare him for what he was about to learn, because this revelation didn't just devastate, it rewrote everything he believed about himself, his family, and his brother. Kate waited for the right moment, when the children slept and the palace corridors fell into their eerie stillness, offering no speeches or preamble, only the soft slide of paper across a polished table and a look in her eyes that made William's heart sink before he read a word. He sat slowly, expecting routine briefings, until his eyes caught the names Diana, and beneath hers, one he didn't recognize. Confusion flickered, then dread took hold as the report laid out its conclusion with cold scientific certainty, stating a connection that should never have existed. The silence thickened as William leaned back, rereading the lines again and again, willing them to change, but they never did. Memories surfaced unbidden: his mother's hushed phone calls, her trembling voice behind closed doors, diary entries dismissed as paranoia, questions she had asked, accusations she had made, truths she had only hinted at before being swiftly branded unstable. And now, staring at the document, William understood it hadn't been madness at all, but a warning never meant for him to hear. Tears formed quietly, not from grief but betrayal, as he realized his entire life had been shaped by a version of history carefully constructed and fiercely guarded, and now that version was collapsing. That carefully constructed facade had crumbled, replaced by a new truth that altered not only how William saw his mother, but how he saw himself. His voice broke the silence, barely a whisper. I always knew something didn't add up. He wasn't speaking to Kate, he was speaking to the ghost of a mother whose cries had long been ignored. The revelation rippled through him, unsettling not just the past, but the very foundation of the future. The bloodline he belonged to, the crown he had been raised to protect, the legacy he was meant to inherit, all now hanging in precarious balance. Yet as William's world wavered, another storm was gathering, because someone had always known, and she had no intention of letting the truth escape. Camilla didn't shout, threaten, or need to. Her power lay in precision. One whispered warning, and everything froze, because this was no longer about secrets, it was about survival, and Camilla was ready to destroy anyone who stood in her way. Kate had barely begun to process the fallout when Camilla appeared, like a shadow in the corridor, stepping through the door without knocking and sitting across from her, as if she owned the silence. Her expression was unreadable, her voice smooth and practiced, and she didn't ask what Kate knew. She told her she didn't need proof. She had always known the man in the photos, the DNA results, Diana's hidden archive. To Camilla, it was merely an inconvenience, not a tragedy or betrayal, just a threat to be managed. Now that Kate had stumbled into the Crown's darkest corner, Camilla was there to ensure she didn't take another step forward. Her words were soft, cloaked in civility, but each landed like a blade. She didn't deny the truth. She confirmed it with quiet arrogance, murmuring, Diana was always reckless, always emotional, always a liability. Then, with a subtle shift, the attack became personal. Kate's past, her sister's scandals, her uncle's financial missteps, all laid bare. Do you think the press won't devour you too? She asked, her thin smile cutting. They loved Diana once. Kate froze, fingers gripping the arm of her chair, heartbeat pounding, as Camilla leaned in slightly. You're clever, Catherine, but you're not untouchable. Expose this, and you won't just destroy the monarchy, you'll destroy yourself, your family, your children's place in it all. Calm, controlled, terrifying, Camilla didn't posture or plead. She simply made it unmistakably clear. The monarchy would not fall to a grieving daughter-in-law chasing ghosts, and if it came to war, Camilla would fight with every ounce of cunning at her disposal. Camilla exuded the cold detachment of someone who had survived scandal, disgrace, and humiliation and turned them into power. But rather than breaking Kate, her threats forged something stronger: defiance. Kate faced a choice: stay silent to protect the crown, or speak to protect the truth, and on that bitter morning, she did not hesitate. She stepped into history not as a duchess, but as Diana's voice reborn, ready to reveal a truth that would leave the world breathless. No more waiting, no more hiding behind protocol. Kate had heard the warnings, endured the threats, and watched the man she loved crumble under a burden too heavy to bear alone. The palace expected compliance, counted on her silence, but they failed to realize they weren't merely trying to bury a secret, they were trying to bury a woman who had already been silenced once before. And Kate knew, deep in her bones, that Diana deserved more. There were no grand announcements, no press teams, no royal aides to mediate. Just a quiet call, a location, and a time. Early morning outside the gates of Kensington Palace, where the world had once mourned Diana with flowers and tears. Kate stood with trembling hands, but unshakable resolve. Reporters were initially confused. This wasn't on any calendar. No event was scheduled, but the moment they saw her step forward alone, clutching the documents that had shattered her world, they realized this was history in motion. She offered no apologies, no preamble. She began with a name, Diana, and spoke of her as more than a princess, as a mother, a woman, a truth-teller trapped in a system that punished her for speaking. Kate recounted the letters she had read, the warnings Diana had written in ink that bled with fear, the photographs carefully hidden, and the DNA test results that confirmed the unimaginable. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She laid out the truth raw and indisputable. Diana had a child the world had never known, kept hidden, buried under decades of silence and denial, a son. Holding up the verified DNA reports, Kate offered not persuasion, but proof. She didn't ask the world to believe her, she showed them they had no choice. Cameras clicked, microphones buzzed, the crowd froze, and the silence that followed her final words weighed heavier than thunder. No questions, no rebuttals, just the sound of a monarchy shaken to its core. Within minutes, news outlets around the world lit up with red banners and breaking alerts. Kate Middleton confirms secret son of Diana. DNA bombshell rocks royal family. The hidden heir. Royal history wasn't just rewritten, it was cracked wide open. For the first time, the silence that had kept Diana in the shadows was shattered. Her truth, long buried, now stood at the center of the world's stage. But just as the world processed the shock, he stepped into the light. For decades he had lived in silence, watching from the margins as his mother's memory was twisted into myth. Today, however, he stood tall, unafraid, ready to reclaim the truth the crown had tried to bury. Diana's son was real, and now he had a voice. The world barely had time to catch its breath from Kate's revelation before the next tremor hit. The man at the center of it all, once a ghost in the shadows erased by the monarchy, stepped forward with calm dignity, facing a global audience hungry for answers. His eyes carried the weight of exile. His voice echoed the woman who had been silenced for far too long. He did not begin with accusations, but with gratitude, looking directly into the cameras and thanking Kate by name. "The daughter my mother never got to raise." That simple, seismic line reverberated worldwide, validating her courage and confirming the impossible. Diana was his mother. He recounted years of secrecy, of an abrupt departure from England orchestrated by those Diana had trusted most. She had not abandoned him, she had protected him, moved him across continents, shielded him from scrutiny, and surrounded him with those who understood the stakes. He spoke of his childhood not in bitterness, but in pain. The pain of watching a mother mourn publicly while being forbidden to mourn her in return. He recalled intimate details no outsider could know: her lullabies, her scent, the phrases whispered when cameras weren't watching, the tears she shed after public engagements, the notes scribbled late at night, and her promise that they would reunite one day, when it was finally safe. The emotion in his voice was raw, unfiltered, and suddenly the mystery of Diana's anguish made sense. She hadn't been losing herself. She had been losing him. As the room held its breath, he turned to the future. "I don't seek titles," he said. "I seek truth." He acknowledged the confusion, the disruption his presence would bring, and the pain it might cause those still inside the institution. But one thing was clear: he was done hiding. "Blood may be denied," he said slowly, each syllable weighted, "but it cannot be erased." That sentence would soon become a headline, a rallying cry, a truth no press office could spin away. In that moment, the myth cracked, and history, real, messy, undeniable history, began to surface. For the first time, Diana's legacy wasn't being rewritten, it was being reclaimed. The world, however, was not ready to accept him so easily, and inside the palace, battle lines were already drawn. Camilla vanished, Charles refused to comment, and William and Harry were nowhere to be seen. But behind gilded doors, the family was fracturing, and the crown had never felt heavier. The monarchy, once defined by ritual and restraint, now found itself at the epicenter of an uncontrollable storm. The revelation detonated across continents, leaving stunned headlines and splintered loyalties in its wake. Royal courtiers scrambled behind closed doors, drafting statements that never passed approval. Every minute without a response was interpreted as guilt. Every moment of silence felt like confession, and fear crept like fog behind every door. At the heart of the political machine, Parliament no longer whispered, it debated openly and aggressively about the implications for the line of succession. If Diana had another son, where did he fall? Could centuries of protocol be rewritten by DNA? Could birthright be reassigned by evidence no one had anticipated? Constitutional scholars flooded morning shows, legal analysts dissected every possibility, and royal historians clashed with modern lawmakers. For the first time in generations, the monarchy's foundation was not sacred, it was negotiable. Public opinion fractured overnight. Some hailed the man as the rightful heir, a prince wronged by time and silenced by power. Others condemned the revelation as a betrayal, a cruel twist in a story that had already left too many scars. Protesters gathered at Buckingham and Clarence House, voices clashing between honoring Diana's truth and protecting the crown. The monarchy had always been polarizing, but now it was vulnerable. Inside the palace, William drifted, unseen since Kate's press conference. Advisors begged him to issue a statement to reassure the nation, to take control, but he could not. Every decision now felt like a betrayal either of his title or of his mother. Justice demanded action, duty demanded silence. And in the chasm between the two, he found only paralysis. Harry, meanwhile, watched from afar, silent, offering no interviews, no posts, no leaks, yet his silence was heavy, a witness to his brother's breakdown, to his wife facing threats, to his mother's final secret erupting into daylight. He knew the storm wasn't over. Not even close. Within the palace, the ancient machinery of the monarchy groaned under the pressure. Staff resigned, security tightened, and loyalists grew cautious. Even the Queen's legacy, once untouchable, was quietly questioned. Had she known? Had she consented? What else had been buried with Diana? The crown no longer gleamed. It cracked. For the first time in centuries, it looked less like a symbol of endurance, and more like a fragile, exposed relic, bleeding history before the world. Amidst the chaos, one woman stood alone, holding Diana's legacy in her hands, and daring to finish what the people's princess had started. Silenced in life, her voice now roared through the courage of a daughter-in-law, the strength of a hidden son, and the tears of a heartbroken prince. In the days that followed, Kate watched quietly at the edge of the whirlwind she had unleashed, knowing her actions could never be undone. The machine she had defied would never forgive her, yet in her conscience there was no regret, only resolve. She had not exposed a scandal. She had unearthed a legacy, one long overdue to be heard. Across the world, Diana was no longer remembered as a tragic figure consumed by tabloids. She was recognized as a woman who saw the cracks before anyone else dared acknowledge them. A strategist who left breadcrumbs not of sorrow, but of foresight. Her interviews were rewatched, her letters reread, her warnings now echoed with eerie precision. Diana wasn't fragile she had foreseen. And through her hidden son, the world saw proof that her love had outlived fear. He claimed no titles, sought no throne, but used his voice to champion the causes that had once defined her heart. Mental health, children's safety, and freedom from institutional abuse. Every word he spoke returned Diana's message to the world, stronger than ever. William, too, transformed. He emerged not as a polished figure, but as a man weathered by truth, speaking with raw honesty about pain, betrayal, and grief he had only now understood. He also acknowledged respect for Kate, for the brother he never knew, and for the mother who had fought to protect him when no one else believed. The monarchy, forced to confront its past, began a slow, reluctant shift. Quiet reforms behind closed doors, re-evaluated policies, redefined roles, but no ceremony could erase the image of a family cracked from within. The crown remained, but its shine dulled. It no longer stood untouchable, it stood accountable. Diana's story was no longer a hidden chapter in royal history. It became the start of a reckoning. She had once wished to be remembered as the queen of people's hearts, and through those who dared to listen, she was. Those who tried to bury her secret had instead planted a revolution. Diana's truth lives on, and the crown will never be the same again.